to Elementary. I hope you had a fabulous day wherever you were. So today I wanted to talk about everything condos, and I hope this topic is going to be of interest. It was interesting because I wanted to say, condos, while many of you are probably staying away from it, I thought it would be the perfect segue to really kind of have this conversation, not for anything else, but just so that people know the good, the bad, the ugly, what to look for. And like anything else, condos can be a great opportunity or it can be a total flop, depending on what you choose. Now, sometimes condos is your first step to homeownership, right? Or they're also your last step when you're downsizing. That may be something you come in, you downsize into. And it has a host of lifestyle options. And so I find a lot of times people on either end of the spectrum are looking for lifestyle options, and that kind of works out quite well. Now, having said that, a condo is not just an apartment, right? This is what I want to break away from. It's really, when you're buying a condo, it's not like you're buying a freehold house. There are hidden legal documents, lifestyle factors that every buyer should consider no matter what. Whether you're a first-time buyer, investor, downsizer, doesn't matter. So let's take a deep dive into condos. We're going to talk about status certificates, why they're important, the truth about maintenance fees. I'm going to break it down a little bit so that you can understand the difference on maintenance fees. I'm sure you know some of this, but I just wanted to refresh you. How to select the best buildings, I won't go into great depth because, of course, we've got limited time. And the Airbnb nightmare or the Airbnb condo building heavy nightmare, and how to evaluate amenities and what you're paying for, if you're paying for luxuries you'll never use, and finally managing your condo costs, and so that you're not surprised down the road, right? So what exactly is a condo? A condo, like I said, is not just an apartment. It's part of a corporation, and you own your individual unit, but you also own shares in this corporation that hosts a number of things. Like, for example, shares in common areas is what they call it. And that could be the lobby, hallway, gym, pool, rooftop, parking garage. And in Toronto, the Greater Toronto Area, these condominiums are governed by the Condominium Act. And each building has its own legal document, set of rules, budgets, and responsibilities. And even every homeowner and shareholder of the corporation then should be aware what this means for them, especially if the building has financial issues. So what people are very surprised about is that when they buy a brand new condo, they're surprised to learn that almost 90% of people that buy brand new are investors, which means 90% are probably going to not be end users. And as the building progresses, that number changes a bit, where you start to get end users in. But a lot of times you'll have people that are renting because perhaps investors have purchased these units. So let's talk about status certificates. I mentioned that word before, and you probably know the word. And if you're new to condos and you're looking to buy, a status certificate is a report card. But it's not just a report card. It's a report card and some, right? It's gives you the financial health of the condominium. And it talks about reserve funds, which is how much money the condominium has to repair big ticket items. Ongoing lawsuits, you're all part and parcel of this. Special assessment, rules, restrictions, and more. And a lot of times your lawyers will get these documents on your behalf. They'll review it. And you should be aware of every single thing. Now, while the building may say, I have a pet restrict policy. Let's talk about that because that's a big one. Back in the day, a lot of the older condominiums still have the no pet policy. Now, in today's world, of course, especially after COVID, everyone had a pet. And so what started happening is more and more condos have adopted a pet policy, but there's a restriction. And you need to know what it is. Don't wing it because it becomes a little bit of an issue. Now, if you already move into the building and you bought it brand new you did not have these restrictions in place, that's one thing. They'll probably grandfather you. But if you're buying a building or buying a unit in a building, you need to know what the pet policy is if you have a pet. And you need to know what you're buying into, because if they say restricted, they may have a restriction on size, they may have a restriction on weight, they may have a restriction on your pet and how many pets you can have, whether it's one cat, one dog, or just two, so on and so forth. So these are really, really important things. But the things to watch for are the reserve fund balance, special assessments, huge special assessments. And the reason why I say special assessments is your lawyer should flag it, because a special assessment is above and beyond. And if you're buying a unit that has a special assessment, red flag. But if they already have a special assessment in place, sometimes what happens is if you don't catch it, your lawyer doesn't catch it, you're going to end up spending money on that. So I had someone told me about they had bought a unit. And so what had happened is I had gone in when they wanted to sell the unit, and they were just coming out of a special assessment. And then they were telling me, so when I asked them, okay, any special assessments, any of these, I was asking these questions when we had the initial meeting. And one of the things they were like, my goodness, like we just got caught with one because we didn't know there was a special assessment. And when we went to give our maintenance fees, they told us, no, we had to give an amount. Now that should have been caught by the lawyer, and that should have been caught up front. And I'm not quite sure how these people ended up, what happened, because it wasn't with me, so I don't know the details. But these are things to be very apprised of. And while you say, my lawyer is good and whatever, you should be aware of what these things are, so you can ask the questions. What is in the reserve fund? What does that reserve fund look like? How good is that reserve fund? Special assessments. Is there any big ticket items that that are upcoming that they don't have any money to cover, right? Like a lot of times you'll have special assessments for like underground parking, because the parking needs to be maintained. And if they haven't spent enough money to maintain, and the concrete is crumbling, and those things are structural issues and they have to get done. And those can be big ticket items. Or if there's a lot of retaining walls around the place, those are key things to kind of be mindful about. But litigation, if people are suing, that's a red flag too, because the corporation is getting sued. And so definitely you want to know more about it. And then as I mentioned, pet rules and short-term rental rules. So if you're planning to Airbnb, and we'll talk about Airbnbs a little bit, you should know what the short-term rules are and what rules the building allows. Some buildings will say no Airbnb. Some buildings say no Airbnb and turn a blind eye. You want to make sure you're not caught in that loop. And then there are bylaws by the city that, like in Toronto, they have the vacant property bylaw. You cannot rent your property for more than 180 days. So if you want to do an Airbnb, it can only be for that day. And then if your property is vacant for the rest of the time, you have to pay that vacant tax, which seems to get heftier and heftier every time we talk. Maintenance. So this is where I think most people stop dead in their tracks when they're talking about condos, right? This is where people are like, oh my God, I don't want to pay the maintenance. I absolutely don't want to pay the maintenance. But this is what you have to understand. Whether you had purchased a home, you'd still have to maintain your home. You still have to do stuff around it. And if you buy a condo, you have to pay some fees. All of those, someone has to cut, have beautiful landscapes. Someone has to cut the grass. Someone has to deal with the lobby. You want a doorman. Someone has to pay him. But where you have to be apprised of maintenance is, how does this maintenance stack up? And what's included in all of this, right? So new versus old, and typically it's hard to explain to people, because while you might get a brand new condo and the maintenance could be like $500, but the condo size could be like under 500 square feet, and that is like $1 square foot, right? maintenance. So maintenance is like a huge issue, and you have to know what you're getting into. Not every, you have to compare apples to apples and be able to segment the what is covered in these maintenance costs. So some new buildings, when they're brand new, you'll see a really low maintenance, but within the year the maintenance will go up. And sometimes I can see how the building ages and you have to pay more because everything is getting older, but there's some good and bad with everything. Newer condos, yeah, they have newer amenities, all nice and shiny. But these days I'm noticing condos getting smaller and smaller. Actually, yesterday I showed a bunch of places, and one of the things you kind of pointed out to my client was this building has 15 floors, this building has 15 floors as well. This building has 201 units, and the other building that we were looking at had 450 units, right? And that doesn't mean a thing, but it was quite clear when you look at how big the square footage is. Some places will say smallest unit is like 800 square feet, and back in the day that was small, but these days the smallest unit is like under 500 square feet, and I'm talking with the balcony and everything. So a lot of times it's like 400 square feet or something. Anyways, there's a lot of talk about that. I don't want to talk about that because it's a lifestyle for someone. If you're single and you're paying rent, these units could be a good place for you to kind of move into and own, because it's your own, right? So you have to be aware of what you're going to get for, let's say, that maintenance fee, what all the building has. So now some buildings will have, when you have this blingy rooftop pool, sounds great, right? But guess what? You're paying for it. And you want, cleaning I think is important. I like to see when I walk into buildings that are clean, that the staff are cleaning. I like that because I think there's so much usage. I think cleaning is of utmost importance. Of course, snow removal, all of those, and repairs, right? It's one thing when a building has money but doesn't do any repairs. It's really not good for anyone because a building needs to be maintained. And but you also have to, like, for example, you're buying a brand new condo, right? And yeah, the shiny finishes are good and the brand new everything, which is amazing. But you also have to be aware of like the sizes, the smaller size, the phantom maintenance, for example, the fees that spike after the developer leaves. Like, so when they start to take over, they really realize how much they have to spend. What else is covered? Is it water, hydro? Some of these buildings these days have nothing covered except for insurance, that kind of stuff. They have nothing else covered. Some buildings will have, they say, parking. But it's very strange because some of the buildings these days have very little covered, and you should know what is covered, right? So one thing you must see is the status certificate. Look, it's one thing to look at a listing and see what's listed, okay? Because not everybody lists things properly. The second thing is your go-to, your status certificate. You want to make sure your lawyer tells you before you waive that status certificate what is covered with this building in the maintenance fees. And so then older buildings, they would probably have a bigger floor plan, bigger layout, little more storage. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve here. But of course, you have to also bear in mind that maybe the elevators, the plumbing, the heating systems could be aging. And as they get older and they haven't been changed, you might be caught in that cost, right? So you must look at, yes, how much money do they have in their reserve fund? So if there is a problem, they can pay for it. If not, they're knocking on your door, getting you to pay for it, which is kind of scary because it can be quite a bit, right? And if you are buying a place that has, I would never recommend someone buy a place that has a special assessment. Sometimes what will happen is you don't really know. Obviously, if you owned in that building, you want everyone sharing it with the whole neighborhood. Hey, by the way, they have a special assessment. in this building. You if you're an owner, you don't really want to share that information because it kind of like has like a check mark that goes with it, right? No, people will start to stay away from it. I mean, personally, I wouldn't buy a unit with a special assessment, so I wouldn't encourage my clients to buy. I mean, that's just me. But if they wanted to buy it, that's their choice. They just have to know what I don't sell junk. That's the thing. I'd rather not sell it than sell junk to someone. So what else should you know? Like a well-managed condo, you can see the difference. A well-run condo, will have fewer headaches. Sometimes people put Google reviews. I'm not quite sure. Like a lot of people don't really do that. What else? Turnover rates. And while people are saying, hey, I'm going to check turnover rates and maybe people are selling quick, I'm actually more apt to check when the last time a property was sold. And if there's a 2-year window, because a lot of times when you have a special assessment, it's a 2-year window, right? You can take 2 years to pay the amount or pay it as a lump sum up front. And so when there's a special assessment on the units, you'll see a 2-year, a lot of times you'll see a 2-year gap because nobody wants to sell their property because no one wants to buy. So people a lot of times just ride that wave until the assessment comes off. And visit at different times, get a feel for what's going on. And of course, like I mentioned, check the reserve fund. Now, the reason why I mentioned earlier about Airbnb buildings, and honestly, I would tell you to stay away from them. They're nothing but a headache because there's so much more wear and tear. There's like such a transient population coming through, right? If there's just everyone just coming in for a day or two or a week, you're just constantly having people use the elevator, use the facilities, use the place like a hotel, really. But really, there's one thing that I'm going to bring up that you should be aware of. There's a case law that came out on Airbnbs. And if you have an Airbnb, you might want to read this case law because technically when you sell it, you'll get dinged as if you were selling a business. So read the case law, figure it out for yourself. I'm not here to give you legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not here to give you legal advice. And so a lot of times they have frequent renters because I'm calling them renters, but they're really short-term, day or 2 weeks. More garbage, more noise, more partying. Security becomes a bigger issue. Then they have to spend more on security. What else? Investors seem to want to dump the units really quick because they see the value tanking a little bit. And so a lot of buildings will ban short-term rentals, and for this reason, because they want to make sure. So you want to check the status, but you also want to make sure like you're kind of getting an understanding. There are some well-known buildings downtown that are just known to be Airbnbs, and they seem to have, all the issues because all these party animals come there, and I don't know what they do. Like, I don't know why they come there to act up, but that's what they come there to do. So the other thing that you have to understand is that the more amenities a place has, the more it's going to take to maintain. Therefore, the kicker is that you pay more maintenance cost. Because if they have like pools are really expensive. People don't realize this. Pools are really expensive. And so they have a gym, pool, all of those things, concierge, gate, doorman, guest suites. Well, guest suites are guest suites, but still, if they have all those things, then they're going to be more money to maintain. But some of the buildings also have hydro included, and a lot of the new buildings, like I said, have not much included, but the older buildings, you'll see hydro included. And the reason for that is because they never did individual metered units, and they never had individual unit, or just like one big unit. And that can be good, and it can also be bad, right? Because you can also have people who are misusing the hydro because they don't have to pay for it, right? So how do you manage condo costs? Of course, you want to take a look at, obviously budgets increase every year. at least 2%, right? And so you want to take a look at a condo to see how many percent year over year the costs have gone up. Is it 2 to 5%? Is it more? So year over year, and when you get in the status certificate, there is a little piece that shows, from 1 year to the next year to next year what the expenses have been. Now, for some reason, costs have really skyrocketed in the last couple of years. But the most important one is to make sure the emergency fund is good so that you don't get hit with the special assessments. And yeah, like double check what the fees include so that you know what you're getting and you don't get shortchanged or you don't get a surprise. So look beyond. This is like really coming to the end of it, just wrapping up. If you're buying a condo, skip the lipstick. I know a lot of people get stuck on, prettiness. And trust me, Mapleful Rentals is on. So he knows, he has a lot of great furniture that we can pretty up your place with. And so technically, yeah, we can make any place look gorgeous. But that's not the point. The point is you want to make sure that you don't get wrapped into all of the cheap renos and not look at the big ticket items. Because sometimes I look at people that are getting pulled into a unit because they've got some nice renos, but they've got like bigger ticket items. I'm not talking about, little items in the condo, right? But I'm talking about big ticket items that maybe their status is not good. Maybe they're not managed. Maybe we got tons of like lawsuits, all of that. Checks the square footage. So a lot of times when the square footage is listed, you want to make sure that you've checked the square footage properly. Understand what you're buying, because you want to make sure that whatever you're buying, you can resell for the same or more, much more if nothing else, because you are looking into the future as well. But also, the reason why I say that is because I see so many people these days getting stuck. They walk into, I have to say this, people walk into a sales center. They go by themselves because they think, hey, how hard can this be? And they're so jazzed. They like freaking jazzed with all of these shiny brochures and all these shiny things, and the lineup out the door, and the sales center has this whole vibe going on because they've got like, this party happening, and they want to bring you in and treat you like a VIP. And did you bring your checkbook, sir? But look, I'm not, knocking the builders. They're selling what they're selling. But people get so sucked into that. You don't understand how else you can get sucked in and buy a unit where the price per square foot doesn't make sense. And the builders are saying, hey, I'm projecting the cost, because if these ones are selling for this, so now they will be selling for much more. They're projecting the cost. They've done some crazy math. Their math. That is, they're mathing their own math. And you never know the formula for their math. You just step outside and you go take a look at the resales that are listed. You would say to me, darn, why didn't I go take a resale property instead? And the one thing I will tell you, the difference between buying a brand new and buying a resale is that what you see is what you get. You get to see the board that has been running for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. You get to see all of those things that you would stand out like red flags. You get to see the unit and you get to really kind of feel yourself in it. I've had a couple of people tell me they would never buy again. I hope they learned their lesson because, for some reason they didn't imagine the space. And not everyone can. Like, yeah, I do this for a living, so I can walk into a space and figure out. I can look at a piece of paper and figure out how big that room is going to be. But really, it comes down to a layout. People will look and say, oh, this is how big the room is. But really, it comes to the layout and the flow. And when you've walked through enough places, you can walk through a layout the same way. Now, not everyone can do that. Some people can visualize it. So some people were visualizing themselves in this big space, and they ended up in this small little horribly spaced room with little nooks and crannies jutting out that they can't really do much. They've lost like 2 feet of space because they've got like a bulkhead sticking out somewhere. Weird. Anyhow, having said that, it's always great to do resale because what you see is what you get. You get to walk in, you get to take it in, you get to imagine yourself in that space, and if it needs renos, then you know exactly what it's going to cost you at the door. I think that there are no questions today. I wanted to talk about the condos because I put in this little 15-second reel, and someone actually commented on YouTube saying that stay away from them, and they use the term interchangeably, like terms that you would use in BC or you would use in the US as opposed to just in Toronto. And so I wanted to do this video so that people are aware, like, condos are not a bad thing. You just have to do your homework and make sure you're not getting into the worst building, buying into something junky, whatever, and just knowing what you're getting into. So I hope I could clarify anything. If you have any questions, DM me. If you have a topic you'd like me to unpack further, I'm happy to do so. And for those of you watching who don't know me, my name is Jacqueline Watson. I'm a realtor with Sutton Group in Toronto. And like I said, we are truly a Canadian brand. And I mean that. We are Canadian. So if you're looking for a Canadian brand, that's what I'm selling here. I'm selling myself and my Canadian brand. So yeah, until next time. We'll talk soon. Take care. And thank you so much for joining on your dinner hour.